Um, and as an indigenous woman, I start showing you my family. This is the Mochica side of my family, my dad's side. And although my mom was Quechua, I truly identified a lot more with the Mochica. And if you can see them, I resemble a lot them. So these are photos from the area of Puerto Eten in the 1900s. We were lucky enough to get some photos from the coastal groups, and I am doing this as a gesture of respect from my land, my part of the world to your part of the world. No? The Mochica territory was invaded because the coast was largely invaded by Western civilization. So the language, the last speakers were around probably 1910. There are now efforts to revitalize the Mochica language, but they are very limited. Okay, so I'm going to start with my presentation. The first part that I would like to talk to is about the languages in danger. The communities, the people that speak those languages are and have been experiencing such danger in their lives too. Letting go of one's language and not allowing the new generations to inherit our language patrimony entails not only a terrible suffering, but it means relinquishing to our voices. No? The kind of work that I do is different than what other linguists do, which is I am interested in the languages that are endangered, but more than anything, I am interested in the communities, in the people, in the human side of these losses. It's not only, to me, it's not enough to look at the languages, but to basically look in the same way to the people that speak the languages. Because if the languages are wounded, if the languages are discriminated, the people that speak the languages go through tremendous amount of pain. And sometimes I think the movements of endangered languages around the world, even within the UN, within the United Nations, sometimes focus too much on the language per se, not thinking about the people that speak the languages. Okay, so, and my work is exactly what I am expressing, no? According to the Foundation for Endangered Languages, there are approximately 6,000 to 7,000 living languages today. Of these, 10 major languages constitute the native tongues of almost half of the world's population. While not all the remaining languages can be considered endangered, over half of them are. What is this telling us? This is telling us that we have mainly 10 languages that are considered the majority in English, Spanish, and we can go, no? Mandarin, there are different ways to measure that. But then all the other languages are placed in a second place, like if they are not as important, no? And we sociolinguists see this fact as the moment in which there is this asymmetrical relationship. Okay, this lack of equilibrium in which some languages are thought to be the civilized, the one who have writing system, the one who are official. And the other ones are even thought as not languages. If your language is not understood as a real language, then the people that speak that language are immediately discriminated. And that is something that has happened, I think, around the world, but it is something that comes from our own experience. And I think from my personal experience too, because my mother, as a speaker of Quechua, we growing up in an urban setting, we went through a lot, we suffered a lot. So when I talk about this, I am not talking of a subject matter that I am studying or I am observing. This is something very personal to me. Around a quarter of the world's languages have fewer than 1,000 remaining speakers right now. And linguists generally agree in estimating that the extinction within the next century of at least 33,000 of the 6,000 or 7,000 languages listed by Ethnologue, or nearly half of those 7,000 are virtually guaranteed under, not guaranteed under the present circumstances. The threat of extinction thus affect a vastly greater proportion of the world languages and as the same as biological species, no? What I see when I read this is the human suffering behind having to let go of your languages. Having a family, like what happened to me, my grandmother was basically, on my mother's side, she was basically monolingual Quechua speaker. And when I was growing up, I was walking out, I was being walked out of my native language. So there was a gap in communication there. No one is going to ever return that to me. So if we look at this phenomenon outside of the numbers, no, of the statistics, what I see is a human tragedy behind this. So language loss is the loss of contact among, families, among communities. And that's why for me, it is very important to understand language rights as human rights. When a language dies, a world dies with it, in the sense that a community's connection with its past, traditions, and its base of specific knowledge are typically lost as the vehicle linking people to that knowledge is abandoned. Okay, let me keep on. This is a map of language activists helping revitalize what I call wounded languages. Okay. And those wounded languages are also reflecting on wounded communities. People don't talk about the pain of losing the language, but the pain is there. The pain is there. I see it every day with students here at the university that I am associated with, the denial of them to be able to use their mother tongue, the shame that goes together with this language, no? I don't know if you're here, but you should probably be. This is a map that the UN sent me. Now, my second point is, why is language so important? Languages are a critical part of identity, necessary not only for communication, but also for transmitting epistemic resources, ways of living and knowing. Even emotions, how do you process emotions? Okay, so language is such an important part of a person. And for a society to impose a language that is not, for example, mine or my mother's, and overtly or subliminally or directly or indirectly tell you that your language is no good, that your language is primitive, that your language is not even a language, what is that telling you about who you are and your background? Okay, there are a few. I participated at Columbia University in 2018 with Elsa Stapanopoulos, that you should be in contact with her. She's a professor at Columbia University. She's Greek, but she worked at the UN for many years. Global Justice for Indigenous Language, a symposium. I think we came up with a lot of recommendations, and I think it's important to be in contact with groups like that, because everyone is very open to other, participants. Language as a territory, language in a dialogue with nature. Efforts to safeguard languages at risk are many times associated to the languages per se. What I propose is that these efforts will be associated and directed to safeguard peaceful existence of the speakers of those languages. Support to languages, but above all, we support the communities of speakers. Respect for the languages should be immediately associated to respect for the ones who speak those languages. This is part of my activism, and I think, Ailem, you probably have seen this in my language rights group. This has caught the attention of a lot of people because I think it resonates with people across the world. Okay. I also work a lot on a critique of linguistic discrimination, looking at the dignity and equality of all languages. How can millions of speakers, for example, in my case, I grew up in a bilingual household where the language of my mother had to be hidden completely. The door outside the house, we had to hide that we had any connection to her language. So our bilingualism and her bilingualism, she was dominant, we call that dominant in Quechua, less dominant in Spanish. I was growing up dominant in Spanish. We had to hide that bilingualism. So it's like this perception that that's not even a bilingual situation. Why? Because one language is considered high and the other one low. No? That was all of those paradigms have been proposed and studied a lot by Dr. Joshua Fishman. I don't know if you are aware of his work, Joshua Fishman. I was his assistant at New York University. No? So let me read you here. How come millions of speakers, bilingual and monolingual, could be made invisible? Okay. And then these terms that I use a lot, language shame. I understand, no one has to explain to me what language shame means because I lived it a lot in my life. Even as a child, you as a child, you just sort of act automatically. That should not be the norm, but unfortunately it is. Language pain. Language pain is something that I am working a lot now here in Peru because I see people that don't speak the language feel a lot of pain because there's guilt. Oh, I don't speak Quechua. But the people that speak Quechua feel shame because they do speak it. So we are in this situation in which we have to find some resolution to that, you see? Human suffering, language suppression, and in school, our children, the children that speak the Amazonian languages, the Quechua languages, we are all only evaluated on what they call our deficits. So we are the population that that is evaluated as a deficit, as a population with a deficit, because we don't speak Spanish, because we don't speak Spanish well, because our language doesn't have writing system, you know, we are never evaluated on the strengths that we bring to the school in any, I mean, elementary, primary, or at the university level, no? This is a little bit of a description of the Quechua. Quechua is a linguistic family spoken by around 12 million in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador. In Ecuador, it's called Quichua. In Colombia, it's called Ingano, Inga. And in the north of Chile and in Argentina also, it's called La Quichua. An official language in Peru, historically largely discriminated, no? We are a lot in Peru that speak the language. I talk about this sometimes. I have a special presentation of this, that it's very strange to have so many millions speaking the language, but we have to be hidden. So it's like a constant contradiction. No? Now, the Maya family also, I would like to mention it. Maya is also a family of language spoken by around 7 million in Guatemala, and also spoken in Mexico, in the peninsula of Yucatan. When you go to Cancun, that's a Maya area. It's also spoken in Belize, in Western Honduras, and in El Salvador. It is also important as a transnational refugee and immigrant language, spoken in the United States and in Canada. In Guatemala, there are 22 Mayan languages. And in Mexico, there are a number of them, including Celtal, Tzotzil. The Maya are very, very fascinating. A lot of language defenders, very interesting. These are the maps. The Aymara language, this is Bolivia. You see Bolivia, Peru, spoken by 2.5 million. This is the map of South America. This is Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador. See all of this, Quechua, and this is Aymara. And this is Mexico. I love Mexico because I think indigenous people there have been able to acquire, let's say, a formal education in terms of Mexican values, let's say, Western education. So it's the only country in which I find engineers who are Maya, a lot of PhDs in linguistics, in education. In Mexico, you can claim to be urban and you can still claim your identity. In Peru, once you move urban, no more Quechua, you have to become a regular Peruvian. And look at all of the languages in Mexico. Wonderful, wonderful place. Nahuatl, which was the language of the Aztecs, is spoken in the north, around 2 million Aztec. I work with a lot of they also have a lot of poets in different languages, very nice. In Peru, Yacta Simichiscuna, this is Quechua, 48 languages, being 47 indigenous, and Spanish is 48. And these are other languages of the Amazonian. I'm working a lot with the Amazonian. Let me tell you, a lot of them have died in the COVID, no? This is what I usually use as my seal: protect languages, protect peoples. A ver, from the Quechua experience, in 2010, 2006, these two Quechua speakers were elected as Congress people. She is Hilaria Supa and she is Maria Sumire. I came from New York. I was studying at New York University. I came to work with both. And both of them are the ones who were able to push the language rights legislation that we successfully got approved. And they are the ones that were, you know, the ones who had the 48 languages approved in Congress. That's me. This is Fernand de Barren, the person I was talking to you about. He's now the in charge of minority languages at UN Geneva. He came all the way from there to help us. This is Fernand, and his presence was very important because, you know, he's white man, he spoke French, and he was a professor, but we are Indians. If I say that, if I talk about this, they don't care, but if he did, then if he spoke, they listen to him. Some of the theoretical considerations that I work on. Number one, we need to understand, this is a sociolinguistic based concept, no? We need to understand the asymmetrical relationships of languages in contact, okay? It's not the same to talk about a bilingual situation between Spanish and Quechua than it is between Spanish, for example, and English, no? We need to talk about how it's something that I develop a lot. The inequality in those relationships take you to ultimately the erasure, okay? Once you erase the language, you erase part of a fundamental part of the identity of the person. And that's, I think, probably the case with you and the situation of the last, no? Erasure, erasure, erasure. And what we do is resist, resist, resist. Sometimes we resist not with the language, but with the being, you know. Then these are connected to what we call policies of language extermination. And what Tobes Kudnap-Kangas, I don't know if you know her, if you don't, you should follow her. She calls linguistic genocide. She has a lot of production on linguistic genocide, which bring us to language prejudice, language hierarchies. So this hierarchy of having some languages being the official, and the idea is, okay, you speak this language and you forget about everything else. That brings us to the study of language hierarchies and linguistic violence, language discrimination as institutionalized and outside of formal institutions, no? Right now, there is a lot of fight for the inclusion of indigenous languages in education. But to my view, really what they do is they just try to copy what has been done in other parts of the place. They photocopy and they bring it here. It doesn't work. And the term linguicism, which is like racism, linguicism was coined by Tobes Kudnap-Kangas, Dr. Tobes Kudnap-Kangas, and it has to do with discrimination due to language. More, the relationship between language and emotions, language shame, language pain, human suffering due to language suppression. And again, when you go to school, when you enter the system, you're always evaluated on deficits. Now, again, the theory of Vaughan, language and resistance. Some communities around the world have made it very symbolic to resist through language. And that is something that I go around in the world observing. What Dr. Fishman proposed, and Fishman is the father of sociolinguistics, at least in the United States. He passed away in 2015, and he was like a father to me. I spent many years working with him, assisting him. No? What Fishman says is that there is a possibility to change this decline by a phenomenon called language shift, and then reverse this language shift that pushes the language to go in a loss, no? And he created a paradigm where he talks about the intergenerational transmission, no? It's Fishman's model to reviving threatened or sleeping languages, no? And making them sustainable. If the language is not transmitted, it doesn't matter how much do you, for example, we just saw the rock, that song that I play that you saw. That group of people, most of them they still have Quechua as their language one. However, if they are not transmitting that to their children, no rock and blues in Quechua, it doesn't affect. The language is going to die. So we have all of this terminology was created by Joshua Fishman. Language laws, how do we maintain the language? And this is the one that I like more, language loyalty. Some groups around the world make it very strong to be loyal to their language. And then what we talk a lot about, and it's being talked a lot about around the world, language revitalization and language revival. Some of the authors working on this terminology is Fishman, who he's no longer with us, Leonor Grenoble, Tsunoda, Gilad Zuckerman. Gilad, this is a good friend. He talks about the fact that he doesn't call the languages that are losing dead languages, but he calls them sleeping beauties, meaning that they could come back to life if the love of the speakers bring them to life. David Crystal and Nancy Dorian. This is my seal also, language rights. And coming from a Quechua background, this is the dancer that you saw in the video. You know, he's very symbolic to us of the revival and the resistance of the spirit of Quechua speaking the languages, even in spite of horrendous discrimination, no? And we place a lot, that's at least how I see it. We are not a written culture as writing in the alphabetic system, but I think we have been, quote, writing, unquote, with our dances, with our songs, and especially with our weaving tapestry. There are lots of coding there, you know, that we are now trying to bring to the table to talk about how could we include all of this on an equal to equal basis in the school setting. It's an epistemological fight, and I don't know how we're going to do, but I'll do what I can. So this dancer is very symbolic because the day that the dancer stops to dance, that we don't have new dancers, then it will be like if 1,000 libraries are burned. This is something that is going on. Young people are taking the cities. This is not in the city of Lima, but in Cusco, where Machu Picchu is. They are using poetry and appropriating themselves of the alphabetic writing to write in the language. I think the idea is not to say that we don't want to write, but to the contrary, that if writing is something we can add, it's important, but not subtract, you know, not say, oh, we are, you know, the weavings are not important, but to place weaving and other, you know, of our elements at the same level of writing. In colonial conquest, language did to the mind what the sword did to the bodies of the colonized. This was my professor too, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He's an African Kenyan from Kenya. I've been trained by very anti-colonial people in my life. Why are our languages at risk? Now, I'm going to put you in contact with what is going on right now, because I am a person who's a contemporary Quechua, and I am very interested on what other contemporary indigenous people are doing right now. This is Elena Yasnaya. She's a very important language rights advocate. She is from Ayutle Mije background in Mexico. She came out with this phrase: our languages don't die out, they are killed off. Okay, and the other one is someone from the Ojibwe Nation in Canada that came up with this. I really would love to see the dialogue around indigenous languages shift from languages dying off to languages being killed. We are not letting them die off. We are denied the resources to be able to revitalize them after they were intentionally injured through colonialism. These are two young people. They don't know each other. One is in Canada, the other one is in Mexico, but look at how our thoughts, our ideas are coming through in the same road. This is, she's very powerful. Her name is, and she's the first one who took center stage in speaking totally in her native language, Mije, at the Congress in Mexico. No, you can take a look at her. The next point I would like to make is the sacred relationship between language and territory. For us, Mother Earth has a narrative, and we need to be in tune with this narrative. The only way to tune with this narrative is to understand that language is territory. It's not only territory because we are standing on it, but it's territory within, internally. When you speak your language, you feel that you are in control of your place. Okay, and territory is a big situation for us in Latin America, and I think around the world. Because, for example, in the Amazon, because of oil and because of different kind of mines that they are looking for with metals, copper, you know, lithium, right now, our territories are being invaded. So here I am putting, when we are removed and we are relocated or displaced, we lose contact with our territory. Remember, our languages were born of the relationship between us and our environment. Land, language, territory, nature are all closely tied to the creation and the maintenance of our languages and our traditional knowledge. So, as a mirror of what I see here, not only in Peru, in Mexico, in many other, even in the US, I emphasize a lot of this. How is our language, our word, going to flourish in a territory that is taken away from us? No to the removal of communities from homeland territories. As I am speaking now, so many people are being relocated, and this doesn't come up in the media, but the abuse is terrible. And since I have worked a lot on language policies, it's not easy to work on language policies and coming up to agreements with the states, because the states have a tradition of having control over the imposition of one language for centuries. So one has to truly act very carefully, not to lose the dialogue, but to insist on the fact that the languages cannot be made so that language are stored in libraries or in institutes of languages, or in institutes, no? Languages are their speakers' creation. Languages are inseparable from homeland territory. One cannot support the language's safekeeping and at the same time violently remove their speakers from their home grounds. Let me pass this. This is also something that we face a lot. What you see here are indigenous people in Brazil, where they have a terrible time with Bolsonaro. I've seen them, let me tell you, some of them are the brink of extinction after COVID-19. It's been my sad privilege to be in contact with many of them. And we find that many times indigenous people in a situation like the tribes in Brazil are visited by anthropologists, linguists, they are doing documentation, videotaping them, but this is what the answer is. It is racism when you say you love indigenous languages and look down on their speakers. So now we are working on a document so that we will request for our complete permission and to be co-authors in anything they write about us. This is some more of Elena, the Mije, Mexican, she's a good friend. Languages are important. However, much more important are the speakers of these languages. Languages die because their speakers are discriminated, excluded, and violently treated to let go of their mother tongues. Okay, I have in the last few years been even a consultant to the Ministry of Culture and also to the ministry here in terms of trying to, since I worked on the approval of the language law, no? But what I see truly is that what I see is that they want to accommodate everything according to their needs, no? For example, Quechua is usually assigned a modern nationality. They say Quechua is Peruvian. A language that has been in this territory for more than 5,000 years cannot be Peruvian, nor Ecuadorian, nor Bolivian. You know? Language, Quechua is in itself, has its own background. You know? So this tendency to say that it's Peruvian is something that I really, and we reject it, no? But many people have to be quiet. And this is another response to this negotiation of the so-called policies of inclusion that look very good on the website of the state, or it looks very good on the videos, but indigenous people are allowed to be powerful in things that do not put at risk the social structure. This is where we are right now. Okay, we are very good to go and be on the postcard of the folkloric dances, or when they have expo crafts to sell, no? But do you believe that Machu Picchu, you probably are aware of Machu Picchu, no? No indigenous people can go into Machu Picchu, not even the people that live around Machu Picchu, because it costs $30 to go in. So as a summary now, I find that language is a human capital. Bilingualism and multilingualism in any language should be understood as something that is a resource, not as something that is a problem. The territory is important in terms of the language. Claiming the territory is important because it also safeguards biodiversity for all. And then the last part is to look at language defense as the defense of the epistemologies. What is the defense of the cognition and the local knowledge, okay, which has resisted. I don't even know, we've lost so much. I think so many communities, we've lost so much. And that's why it's important to look at this and to, if there is going to be a language policy proposal for any language or any community in the world, it has to be well thought. These are some of the new leaders that are coming up from down up, because she is Gladys Sulsul. She's Quiche from Guatemala. This is Sandra Shinikovat. She's only 24. Really very brave girl. I met her in La Habana in 2018. And this is Aura Cumes. Aura Cumes talks about the epistemologies of domination and what she calls new and old colonialism. You know, sometimes we talk about colonialism thinking that it's past, but there's a new way of colonize us. And this new way of colonize us is to allowing us to say that our languages are beautiful, are wonderful, but you know, they have to be spoken outside of power, far away, no? So first they hated us, we were here, and now they're trying to put us here, but there's never an equal to equal. Quechua and Maya are languages as any other language in the world that should be treated equally. You know, and we will develop writing system in alphabetic, we will. There are things happening. This is Sandra. I have a lot of connection with her. She talks about how the government of Guatemala take over their culture and try to control it. This is another quote from this meet gathering at Global Justice for Indigenous Languages, the symposiums that we have. Efforts to build Indigenous education can use a framework that has come to be known as epistemologies of the South, meaning South as the global South, the people who are always placed in the subaltern, and there is this North that speak all of these beautiful colonial languages, and there are other people that should not be even counted. No? Respect for indigenous cognitive styles, respect for indigenous forms of language and cultural transmission, or local literacies, all in spirit of autonomy and sovereignty. This is more on language and epistemologies, ways of knowing, ways of thinking, ways of feeling, rationality of belief, intuitive knowledge, dialogue with elements of nature, rain, wind, trees, mountains. People think that is sort of, how can I say? In Latin America, we have something that is called magical realism. But for us, there is an author called Daniel Walcott. He calls that indigenous realism. For us, mountains are like people, plants are like people, rivers are like people. They are not less, you know. Oh my God, something with my, hold on. Okay. Okay, that's what we call native epistemes, grounded on native traditional knowledge. As an educator, working with bilingual populations who are exposed to profoundly asymmetrical relationships, I recognize that the issue is complex and the policies to achieve linguistic justice are extremely difficult to implement. At the same time, I recognize its urgency and extraordinary importance. The praxis of our language policy affects us on our deepest and most essential level. It affects us as a nation and as individuals. I think Latin American nations are struggling to decide what kind of societies they want to be. Language is power. Controlling people's language is one way that those in power maintain control over others. As we watch the development of language policy in Peru or in indigenous Latin America, we are also watching the perseverance of ancestral meanings and our future. This is some of the things that I have proposed. There are a group of Amazonian people who came and live in the city of Lima now, tremendous discrimination for them. But what they did with the help of some artists was to transfer the drawings from their clothing into a poster, into a wall. So this is what is going on in Lima right now. This is our response. It's only 5 minutes. This is what I call semiotic landscape.
Semiotic landscape diyoruz biz buna.
Açık mı mikrofon?
Açık.
That's Ophelia. I mean, yeah, a friend. These are other groups. I'm just gonna go fast. This is a group of
bu bir grup
Bolivia, from Bolivia.
Bolivya'danlar.
This is rap in Aymara. Look, this is his mother. So they use a lot of personal narrative, okay? Which is a ways to erase the shame, no? These are a lot of rap.
Utanç duyulmasının konusunda farkındalık yaratmak için.
Yeah. Maya, this is a trilingual from Spanish, Mixteco, and English. Rap in Cuicateco, Maya, all over. Young people are coming out and doing rap. These are a book by the UN looking at the life of young people, more on what's going on. This is my university, the first bachelor's degree that was written in Quechua by this lady. We had to wait like 500 years for the language to be approved, to be accepted as a thesis, no? This is Quechua written. There are lots of problems with the writing of Quechua because we have a lot of varieties. These are a group of people in Zapotec who have created not only books in Zapotec, but also comic. See, Spider-Man has a voice in Zapotec. Very popular with the kids. Also writing in Aguajún. It's one of the strongest nations in the Peruvian Amazon. Here they are. Very autonomous, extraordinary. I learned so much from them. And then an alternative to create an audience that will read the language. Even if people are not used to read the language, then if you put a sign, this is, for example, signaling of an area. It's like a lake, sacred area for the Mije in Mexico, and they erase the sign in Spanish and they put it in Mije. This is happening in Peru, in the area of Puno. You have Quechua, Aymara, and Spanish, trilingual signaling. Guarani, Guarani is a language that is official in Paraguay. Yeah, although, you know, Guarani is spoken largely, a lot of bilingual people in the people that speak Guarani as a native language are usually the poor. I also put some things that happen in Wales. Public signs are important, no? You can look at this a little bit more. You can keep and you can reproduce my PowerPoint with no problem. You can use it in your classes. Language is the carrier of culture and memory. To starve or kill a language is to starve and kill a people's memory bank. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is my professor. And I'm going to end with this. For the silenced languages, this is my dedication, no? For the languages that are pressured towards decline in 2019. And now we're going to have the Decade of Indigenous Language, Year of Language Justice. Thank you very much.
Evet, sorusu olan varsa arkadaşlar.
Here you have
Ben bir soru sorabilirim.
Yes, sure.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Öncelikle böyle bir bizim için böyle bir sunum yaptığı için Miryam Hanım'a. Ben bu Quechua dilinden bahsetti çoğunlukla o dilin konuşulduğu yerlerden. Ben buradaki aktivizmleri merak ediyorum. Yani o bölgede dil haklarını savunmak adına topluluklar nasıl aktivizmler yapıyorlar? Teşekkür ederim.
I think there are, that's why I show the photos. There are people who are defending the language, but there is still a lot of shame and a lot of people are afraid, you know, to speak the language. One thing is to come out and defend it in, you know, debates, but the reality is that the only way to defend the language is to speak it everywhere. And that is still very far away, you know. The Spanish is completely, it's like a block. Not only Peru, all over Latin America. I think the Spaniards, when they invaded the Americas, they left their language it's very embedded, and there is little of what people can do really about that. I think what people do is resist without confronting, but the intergenerational, the passing of the language through other generations is becoming very slow. That's why we are a language spoken by millions, but we are still in the endangered language list. I don't see a lot of youth becoming language defenders. I think it is improving, but it's slow. In Bolivia, it's completely different. In Bolivia, I think the defense not only of Aymara, but Quechua is very strong. The same thing in Ecuador, you know. There are reasons for that, but that would be long to explain. Any question?
Well, I have questions. Okay. Now, I know that there are some films made in indigenous languages. I was wondering if they receive any funding from the government and if the indigenous people show interest in these films.
Oh, yes. It is that's the problem, that sometimes it's poisoned. They receive the money, but it's poisoned because they provide money through the ministries, no? Ministry of Education and Ministry of Culture, but they tell you what to do, how to do it. And I think that's why, for example, in education, we have the tradition of bilingual education. But as I said before, bilingual education is basically, they photocopy what's been going on in the United States, they bring it here, and it doesn't work. Let me give you an example. Bilingual education was given more than 60 years, 70 years ago. And their focus has been to write in Quechua. Writing using the alphabet, the Roman alphabet, writing. People don't write that much. You know, now poetry, it's going on, or the signaling. That means that people are not appropriating that way of communication. So we need to look into it, no? And also the bilingual education methodology is based on transitional. It's basically using Quechua in the classroom, but only until elementary school, and then in high school, it's only Spanish. So a lot of inconsistencies. There's policy, no, to supposedly start programs to revitalize the languages, or to, you know, have indigenous communities develop their own industries. But again, it's not necessarily what the communities decide to do, but what they are being told to do, no?
Ben bir şey sormak istiyorum. Yayıncılık faaliyetleri var mı? Örneğin televizyon, radyo yayını ya da basılı yayın, kitap yayını, dergi gibi Quechua dilinde.
We don't have publishing houses. There are a few. I think last year was the first time in that a Quechua writer was published a novel that was entirely written in Quechua, that you could go and buy it in the supermarket, for example. But I know that many people buy it just like an object, but they don't really read it. You see? That's one thing. The second one, yes, we have broadcasting. The law that was approved contemplated strongly on the importance of having a TV channel dedicated only to indigenous languages. But they didn't do it, of course. They are never going to allow that budget. Peru is, it's a third world country. However, they approved for a news program that is aired at 6 a.m. in the morning. 6 a.m. in the morning for half an hour. But there is controversy, and let me tell you what it is. This is going to, I think, show how complex is the situation of Quechua. Quechua has a lot of dialects, a lot of variations of the language. There are two main, let's say, groups. One is the Southern Peruvian Quechua, that is the most used because Machu Picchu is around there, Cusco, you know, and it's the one that is always in the eye of the government because it's very much used for the folklorist postcard for tourism. But there is the northern Quechua, which is what my mom spoke, called Central Quechua. And some of the Central Quechua dialects are not that intelligible with the Southern Peruvian Quechua. Even within the Southern Peruvian Quechua, there are very different dialects. But the government has selected only one dialect called the Chanca Ayacucho dialect. So for me, if we have a news program, it's just promoting one variation, which is creating a lot of problems because number one, some people look at it and say, I don't understand what they're saying. And other people think, oh, like my mom, no? She used to look at the news program and say, oh, that's the real Quechua. You see, my Quechua is not the good one. So look at what they're doing. The state doesn't understand the Quechua world at all. Some Quechua speakers are allowing themselves to be used like that. And what is happening is that a supra dialect is coming out. You know, like this is the correct one, and you have to speak like me, otherwise, and that connects to writing, forget it. Very difficult situation. Yeah, so I think the idea is to understand that you cannot create language policies for languages using a monocultural, monolingual approach. You need to truly think on diversity, you know, and news programs should be rotating. Let's say 3 months should be conducted by this group of people, other 3 months by this other group of, you know, dialect speakers from different parts. There are even Quechua speakers in the Amazon. They are not even counted. And their dialect is not necessarily the same as the one that is being promoted by the state. So that's creating division. You see, it's not that easy. At the beginning, it was a huge sense of pride, no? But obviously, we have different dialects, different variations of the language, and everyone has the right to be counted, no? So that's the situation. Mm-hmm.
Okay, if there are any questions, we can take them.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose.
Could you talk a little bit more about the elementary education, how, you know, Quechua instruction plays into it? Is it like a secondary language, or I'm really puzzled about, you know, the positive effects of
yeah, there are many
language.
Yeah, there have been a development of how the Quechua language has been treated in the elementary school. Over the years, they have switched from one methodology to the other. Mm-hmm. In general, what they try to do is to teach literacy in both languages, but the language of instruction has mainly been Spanish. Oh. Okay, although the kids really, many of them, you know, don't really speak a lot of Spanish when they show up in schools. It also depends on the degree of urbanization, semi-urban or rural. If the school is rural, I think they basically hire local teachers. Mm-hmm. But there is a problem here, which is how do you write a language that has not been, that doesn't have a tradition? of writing in alphabetic systems. So that's where I think there have been a lot of issues and problems between using syllabic method or global methods. And so writing in itself is like a different tradition. And I understand there is a video that I can send to you that I think it's one of the most, is very clear on how sometimes many parents from the most traditional communities decide not to send their kids to regular school. You know,
why not?
And because they feel that the kid is not learning really how to read and write in Spanish well. He's also not learning how to read and write well in Quechua. So he's also turning himself or herself in someone who's very selfish oriented. So that I think there has been some real problems with the training of teachers, but especially with the goals of the methodologies of how are they going to introduce the written version of the class in the native language. So much as to, for example, when they finish the fourth or the fourth of the fifth grade of primary school in which they go into high school, they stop writing in Quechua at all. It looks like if those years of learning how to read and write in Quechua were of no use to the child in such a way that they only in some ways are forced to use it at school, limited in a limited way, but the reality is that what they do is they basically switch into Spanish. They start to let go of Quechua and they learn how to read and write in Spanish more than they would do in the first language. So I think the goals have been very, very fuzzy, no? That's at least what I observe from the outside, no? But the state doesn't say that. They say that they've made huge achievements, and I think there is a dislocation there that's still, and I think, you know what, I think it has to do with the consultation of the communities. If those schools are autonomously conducted by the community's decisions and the community receives training, but out of their own will, I think things would probably turn into a different way, no? But in 60 years, they have not created a corpus of students who were trained to read and write in Quechua, and they are now readers or writers.
Well, I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
Like, for example, how many hours of Quechua instruction is in schools, in elementary schools?
I think that is now it changes a lot from region to region.
Yeah.
Depending on how much. This is the situation. Many teachers, to be employed, need to pass an exam, and the results show that many of them feel very insecure in their Quechua skills, oral or written, and also in their Spanish skills, oral or written. So from the get-go, you have a teacher who's entering the system with a lot of, you know, imbalances, and the system is not responding. And this is exactly what we have been doing in the past 4 months through the university that I am associated in Lima, trying to tell the teachers that they need to truly, now that we are on long distance, you know, teaching and learning, no? To focus more hours during the school day in the Quechua language, but they avoid it. There is this sort of, how can I say, echo forces that tell the teacher speaking up that the child is mostly going to be evaluated in their Spanish skills, written and oral, not in the Quechua language. So they are sort of neglecting it. And look what they tell us. They say that the parents don't want their children to be taught in Quechua.
Parents what?
So parents don't want their children to be taught in Quechua.
Quechua parents?
Quechua parents.
Yeah. That's what they say.
That's what they say, but I think they don't say it, I think, because they don't want their children to speak the language. I think there is the environment is telling them that schooling is not going to, that schooling in Quechua is not going to help the future of their children. That schooling is basically part of Western, they don't feel it's their school. They feel it's this other society, mainstream, and Quechua should stay here at home.
It's a tough, yeah,
yes.
It's tough. I would imagine that, since the Quechua language has been given the official status, I would imagine that, maybe part of their struggle would be to make Spanish speakers be bilingual, just as Quechua speakers would be bilingual.
That's exactly what we advocate for. But
yeah, because right now it seems like it's a secondary language in elementary school, and then you don't have it at all afterwards.
And it's not non-existent in high school.
Yeah.
And at the university, people are talking in the bathroom. They don't talk outside.
Yeah.
So I sometimes I'm sitting there saying, oh my God. And sometimes if I address people in Quechua, they feel very uncomfortable.
Of course.
Over the 4 years that I came back from New York, in 2016. I've learned to sort of accommodate myself so that I won't be rejected or this crazy lunatic, Quechua that comes from New York that's going to tell me what to do. I mean, I just try to adjust, but I see that the shame and the prejudice is still there. It hasn't changed at all. Yeah. I think that's the idea. The idea is not only that the Quechuas will learn Spanish, but that the Spanish-speaking mainstream people would start to learn Quechua seriously, not as a joke, not as a fetish. Oh, this is so beautiful. No, as a regular language. That is, it has the same properties, that it could span vocabulary, that it could adopt, that it has science behind. That is not still in the mentality of all Latin America. In all Latin America.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a worthwhile struggle, especially in urban areas where, students come from both backgrounds. I mean, the situation might be different in a rural area where only Quechua speaker kids are in school, but in urban areas, it could be worthwhile to encourage, even force Spanish-speaking students to take Quechua classes.
That has been a proposal of having mandatory classes of Quechua, but then we have to choose which variety of Quechua are we going to choose, and then it becomes complicated. There is fight within, and but it hasn't been approved, and I don't know if it will work. Maybe it will, I don't know. But I think the fact that the country is so full of Quechua people, it should really, there has to be a way to make an equilibrium, no?
Yeah.
It's still a struggle. I think we were doing a little bit better 4 years ago, but now with the new government and also with the pandemic situation, things are really very difficult right now.
Miryam, it seems like we all have very common problems. As you were talking, and you said my mother's language was hidden. Literally, my heart burned because I really felt for it. We unfortunately came to the end of this session with our interpreter as well. It has been very, very nice to listen to you, and I didn't even know that there were different dialects of Quechua, and it has been very informative, extremely. And well, we would like to learn more about your languages, about indigenous languages, and perhaps we could organize another session all together.
Absolutely. I would love to. And I would love to, when this pandemic situation, maybe for next year, I really would like to find a way to go there, and then we can have a presentation in Istanbul, because it's one of my dreams in the world to be that part of the world. Is so rich, and we know so little about it. I would love to learn more about the Laz. I was reading an article in Spanish that's come out in Global Voices. I would love to. I would love to interview some of you and publish something so people would know here, and also in North America, because I do have a lot of contact with North American Indian. Because I lived in the North for so long, no? Great.
Thank you very much to you and our audience,
honored.
And also to our amazing interpreter here.
Sorry if I was too fast. And you can use my PowerPoint in any way you would like. You can share it to everyone, and they can look at it. If they have any questions, you have my email address. I love to be in contact.
Thank you very much. We will be publishing this. It will be on YouTube anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Take care.